Hey there everybody, welcome to Tabletop Toolbox. I am Jeff, and I just returned from Indianapolis, Indiana, where I attended GenCon 2023. And not only did I attend GenCon, but it was the first time that I've ever been to GenCon. So obviously it was this, just fascinating, somewhat overwhelming, very expensive, but also very exciting experience. And, I got to meet up with some old friends. I got to meet up with some fellow content creators. I also volunteered with the Dice Tower booth, so I worked a bunch with the Dice Tower staff while I was there, and also got, of course, meet some new people. And a common sort of topic of conversation that came up a good bit was that, oh yeah, that's Jeff. He does a lot over on the Dice Tower, but he doesn't really do anything on his own channel. And I don't know, that kind of just struck a chord with me, and I thought, you know what, when I get back, I'm gonna blow the dust off of this channel. I'm going to start making some new content here for Tabletop Toolbox, and I'm starting with this, a recap of my GenCon experience. So I'm going to talk about some of the games that I got to play, which honestly wasn't very many. Also, a lot of the games that I picked up while I was there, and maybe even close with some of my general thoughts on the GenCon experience. So let's get started. So I arrived a little early in town to help the Dice Tower with some setup, but Wednesday evening returned to my friends Katie and Greg Bowerly of the Meeple Society. Now, I have recently done, sort of helped them with a 24-hour Extra Life fundraiser event up there in Indianapolis, and they were kind enough to let me stay with them during the week of GenCon. So thanks a lot, as they helped me save a ton of money. But the first game that we played at their place was Ice. This is by This Way Games out of Paris, France. I believe the designers are Samson and Hugo, no last names listed on the Kickstarter page. This is a sort of a unique, somewhat abstract game where you represent expedition leaders with teams of archaeologists trying to dig up artifacts out of the Arctic shelf or through some deep layers of ice. It is this multi-level board of these hexagons that sort of overlap each other, and you're digging down through each layer to try and find more and more valuable artifacts. You've got some very set collection goals that you get at the beginning of the game, and there are some other effects that you can kind of kick off throughout the play. And it does have this interesting mechanism where the artifacts that you find you can use as long as you have them to trigger some additional bonus effects, but they don't count towards any of your endgame scoring until you send those artifacts into town, which is not actually a place represented anywhere on the table, but it takes them off of your player board, which then allows you to score them at the game end. So there's this kind of unique push and pull, almost a push your luck element, or hey, I want to use these artifacts for powerful in-game effects, but I have to make sure I get rid of enough of them at the end of the game that I can still trigger my scores. I did enjoy the game. There is this kind of interesting blend of reality and sort of fantasy through these artifacts, which I don't want to say it's off-putting, it's just unusual maybe, perhaps, and so I kind of struggled a little bit to connect to the theme, to the mechanisms in some ways. But I did enjoy it. Not something I'm going to rush out and purchase, but something I wouldn't mind getting a little bit more time with. This was Ice by This Way Games. Thursday morning, I arrived early in Indianapolis, and I'll tell you what, before those doors opened, I had the ambition, the resolve, maybe, perhaps, to stand in line to get my copy of Disney Lorcana, the newest TCG by Ravensburger, which without any argument or doubt was the hotness of GenCon 2023. But by the time those doors opened and I walked through them into the first just dense crowd of people, which I think was a combination of gamers and scalpers and collectors and who knows whatever else, I sort of threw up my arms and said, nope, never mind, because I had to use the restroom, and I just didn't feel like dealing with that hassle. And from everything that I have come to understand from the rest of that morning, that was probably the best decision that I made all week, because we heard of tramplings, we heard of people getting injured, of people getting crushed between doors or whatever else, and I am glad that I was not a part of any of that. So after I dropped some things off at the Dice Tower booth and made that restroom break, I then swung over to the Renegade booth and picked up my copy of Transformers Combiners. This is the newest expansion for their deck building game. This utilizes the giant combiner robots that became a staple, I think, a little late in the Transformers cartoon franchise. In fact, most of these characters I don't frankly recognize. Now, I've played this game a couple of times. I've been really wanting to put together a review for it on the Dice Tower. However, the first core game came out a year ago at GenCon 2022. I had a friend who picked up a copy of that first core game from there. And since then, they have come out with 2 more core games, and 3 more expansions. And so I feel like every time I sit down to get ready to review this, there's another one on the way, and I decide, well, I'll just kind of hold off until I can check that out. As a result, I've actually not gotten to play most of the content for the deck building game. It's not a phenomenal game. The rulebook is atrocious, but I do enjoy the gameplay of it. And I do enjoy, of course, that nostalgia of running around as a bunch of 80s Transformers. So this was very, very high on my list of things I wanted to pick up. I even did manage to get the promo pack number 6 that came with this. And so I'm looking forward to checking out Transformers, the deck building game, Combiners expansion. All right, next up on the list is Sea Salt and Paper. This is from Pandasaurus Games. My friends Katie and Greg managed to snag this for me while they were in line because this thing sold out very, very quickly Thursday morning. I do know that this is a 2-player set collection game. I don't know a whole lot about it. I do like the art style. It has had good reviews already so far, and I'm looking forward to trying this out with my wife. That's really all I know about this, so let's move on. Okay, so I mentioned that this was my first GenCon experience, but it wasn't my first convention. For the past 2 years, I've attended PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia, which is only a few hours from me. And so I've always just driven up early in the morning, picked up some games, chatted with some friends, and then drove home that evening. It's always just kind of been a one-day in and out experience. I was going to be at GenCon for pretty much the full time, at least 3.5 days, so I wanted to try and make the most of it. And one thing I told myself I was going to do was sit through a few more demos and try and get some more one-on-one interaction with some of these games. It's something that I've just always kind of avoided, and I don't know if I've just kind of felt pressed for time. It's probably a bit more just sort of that social awkwardness and being a little bit uncomfortable sitting through a sales pitch, which is basically what a demo is. But I thought, nope, I'm going to try and do some more of those at GenCon. So the first one that I sat through, which you're going to see here how well it went, was Bonsai. This is by DV Games. This is a sort of maybe a slightly abstract tile laying game where each player is trying to build a bonsai tree. You've got a little pot that you're starting off with. You got to grow the bark, you got to grow the leaves, you got to get the flowers to bloom, and you're trying to go for these various goals. You can claim a goal whenever you meet it, but if you want to keep pushing for the next level of that goal, you can only claim one type of each goal. There's like an easy, medium, and hard difficulty for each of the goals, and you can pass up the lighter ones to try and get to the harder ones, and then of course that's that kind of push your luck element to see if you can get to something before someone else does, as you may be left with nothing left if you don't quite make it. It looked really neat. It's a beautiful looking game. My daughter is a big fan of sort of that Japanese culture. I thought she might have a big interest in this, and I think it's only it's a 10 and up, I think, game. Yeah, it says 10 to 99, so plenty of years ahead of us to enjoy Bonsai. The next booth I made a beeline for was Devere Games. Now, I know Devere's been out for a while, but I feel like I've never really known them too much prior to their recent release of Lacrimosa, a game about the life and death of Mozart, which as a classically trained musician definitely caught my eye. This game also caught my eye, not because it's a theme that I'm really, really excited about, but certainly a theme that I think doesn't have a lot of representation in this game, and a couple of looks at the components really just sort of caught my attention. So I managed to grab, just before it sold out, a copy of 3-Ring Circus. I got to open this up. I took a quick peek at it. I didn't really get around to reading the rules yet, but this is sort of a maybe a little bit of an engine building game. I'm not even sure what the core mechanisms of it yet are. Looks like a little bit of a worker placement. There's also a timing element, as I believe Barnum and Bailey is moving around this track, and you kind of have to get things done before they get to various locations. It just looks pretty neat, and I really like the components. I mean, it's got these little wooden circus big top tents that look really interesting, and so yeah, I am looking forward to trying out 3-Ring Circus by Devere Games. Yes, if you are keeping track, we are still going through the Thursday morning gamut of purchases, and this next one is a small box game by 25th Century Games. This is Fika. This is a very small 2-player card game with sort of a theme of a breakfast cafe or a coffee cafe, something like that. Beautiful looking artwork, a very small, like I said, a 2-player card game. My wife and I like to play these a lot when we go to local breweries and such like that. Usually our daughter will have some other friends that she's hanging out with or just playing on her Switch, playing arcade games at some of the local breweries, and so we like to sit and get through a little card game. I don't know anything about this. I don't know how it plays. It looks adorable, and I love the theme, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to trying out Fika. The next game that I picked up wasn't actually for me, it was for a friend here in Richmond who asked if I could try and snag him a copy, and I did, of World Wonders by Renegade Games. Now, this one sold out very early Thursday morning, so I was a bit surprised when I got there to see just 5 copies left sitting on the floor. They had built this giant display in the shape of Chichen Itza, and I was very glad that I was able to snag a copy. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this one because it might come up here in just a little bit, but I did get a copy of World Wonders. Now, after that, I did swing over back towards the Dice Tower booth because I was starting to carry quite a bit of games, and I saw this thing sitting on the table at a booth called Brookstone Games, which I must admit I had not heard of, and this was a giant display of a game that they had sitting on their table. And anytime that I see something with this kind of modern world art view and a giant display, I mean, just covered the entire table, you're definitely going to get my attention. So I was sitting there kind of listening to one of the employees of Brookstone Games talking about the title to another attendee who was there, and they asked, well, what's the complexity, what's the difficulty? And he said, well, it's very similar to Brass Birmingham. Now, I'm not a big fan of Brass Birmingham. It's just kind of a boring looking game, a very boring playing game. I've played it a couple times and it's just not my thing, okay? But I have a friend here in Richmond, a very good friend who I really enjoy playing with, and he loves Brass Birmingham. And so as I kind of took a look at this thing with what looks like to have some sort of engine building elements, maybe a bit of a tableau building in some regards, of course, a market that you can manipulate and all kinds of, you know, trading the economy and such, I sent him a message and I said, Daniel, you've got to check this thing out. And a little while later, I got the thumbs up to go and get the deluxe all-in copy. I've got the mat sitting over here somewhere. This thing has metal coins and like gold bars in it. It looks amazing. I don't know if it's going to be for me. I think it will definitely be for him, and I am looking forward to playing it and hopefully getting to chat some more about Legacies by Brookstone Games. All right, next up here is Sky Team. This is by Scorpion Mask. I don't know if that's actually how you say it or not, but this is a 2-player cooperative game where you represent a pilot and co-pilot trying to land a plane. Now, this is not for me. This is for my sister who actually pre-ordered this. She is a pilot and also a U.S. naval officer. So, yeah, I picked it up for her because she told me to, which is fine. Now, I can't say I'm super interested in this. The reviews that I've heard of it say that it kind of has this non-communication, you know, rule to it. You're not supposed to talk about what you're trying to do. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for a pilot, co-pilot trying to land a plane. It also uses dice placement, which are pretty much my 2 least favorite words in the gaming hobby. I just don't care for my actions being dictated by how I roll a die. But anyways, it is very popular. There were a lot of people carrying this around. There were a lot of people demoing it at the Hachette booth where they had this for display and for sale. So this is Sky Team. All right, with my wallet already thoroughly screaming at me at this point, I did make just a few last-minute purchases on Thursday, and this was one that I was really interested in. This is the Atlantis Rising Monstrosities expansion with some deluxe upgraded components, and I did pick up the Atlantis Rising mat, which I've kind of always wanted, as I think that it's a beautiful looking game, but it kind of has this 6-sided star view, which if you're just sitting on like a black tabletop or the space tabletop that I have on the table behind me, just sort of seems a bit out of place. So I wanted to get the mat for that game. I saw that they had all these extra, you know, the expansion and the extra components, and I just grabbed it. I couldn't even stop myself. This is a fantastic co-op game. If you haven't had a chance to play this, if you're even not a fan of co-op games, I really do recommend this title. I got to play this maybe a year and a half ago with a good friend of mine, a guy I've known since high school. Played it up with some of his friends up in the Baltimore area, and it was just spellbinding, because at the end of that game, as we all stood over the table, sort of planning out our last moves like army generals, you know, in a tent on World War II, we were so immersed in the experience. We were so stressed out from all the things that were keeping us from succeeding. And when we did win the game, we accomplished our first game. We literally applauded. The four of us or so who were standing there just broke out into applause and high fives as we had conquered this game. And I have never felt anything like that in a cooperative game at all. Nothing. Not Gloomhaven, not Spirit Island. None of that stuff felt as climactic at that finish as Atlantis Rising. I'm also a huge fan of the Atlantis theme. So anyways, yeah, this was a no-brainer. Atlantis Rising, the Monstrosities expansion. The last game I picked up on Thursday was one that I kind of teetered on whether or not I was actually going to get. And it wasn't because of the game or the theme or anything like that, even the publisher. It's just because I don't know how often I'm going to be able to get this played. This is Star Trek Away Missions by Gale Force 9. I love Star Trek. I grew up watching Star Trek. I am not a fan at all of Star Wars. I have the other Gale Force 9 Star Trek title, which is Ascendancy. I have all the expansions for it, and I've played it once. And I fear that this is going to be the same way. It's going to be difficult to get this to the table. It's not an IP that is very popular, which is unfortunate because, again, I love Star Trek. I grew up with it. I grew up playing the collectible card game, the TCG by Decipher Games. I love Star Trek. And not only did, of course, I get the core game, but I got the 2 expansions. I got a new mat for the Ascendancy game. Ended up spending quite a bit of money at Gale Force 9, and I really, really hope I can get this to the table soon. It is sort of a tabletop miniatures game based on the story of Wolf 359, which was this kind of iconic episode in the Star Trek The Next Generation series where the captain of the Enterprise, Jean-Luc Picard, was captured by the Borg, and a huge battle ensued as all of the all of the Federation and all of the main factions of Star Trek went up against the Borg. So, like I said, hoping I can get this played soon. Star Trek Away Missions by Gale Force 9. All right, that was Thursday at GenCon. I think I finished out that night with some dinner over at the Yard House. Had a fantastic spicy jambalaya. Highly recommend if you ever get over that way. I hung out with Stephen Bonnecourt and some of his friends there in the board game hobby and just had a great time. Friday morning I got there early. I had to work the booth for the Dice Tower for a couple hours, so I really didn't get to do any exploring until the afternoon. And the first game I went and picked up was Age of Galaxy. This is the second in the line of Age of games. Their first title was Age of Civilization. This is from a small company called Ice Makes. They might be a Korean company, I'm not sure. I got to meet a number of the folks from that little business and had a good conversation with them. The previous game, Age of Civilization, was this very sort of tight, abstract game where you're trying to do a little bit of a tech tree. You're trying to, take advantage of a limited number of actions and build up workers and sort of evolve your civilization. A pretty fun game. You can play it out on Board Game Arena if you're so inclined to check that out. I don't know much about this one. It has some additional components. Looks like it's got a little bit more in here. The box is fairly heavy just for the standard version. I wasn't able to get the deluxe edition, but yeah, I'm interested in checking this out. I do love space games. I think most of you should know that by now. So yeah, looking forward to checking this one out. Now, after that, I got to meet up with my friends Katie and Greg again. We ended up in the Rio Grande game demo room. And of course, a very, very popular space. They had a number of their games on display. I know I saw Beyond the Sun there being played, but everything was packed, right? There were only 2 tables that were open. One looked to be some little card game using like letters of the alphabet or something like that. None of us were interested in that. The other one was a game of Butterfly, this very colorful, cute little game, and I kind of looked at it and I thought, nah, not interested. This is like 10 minutes of my life I'm not going to get back. But we sat down anyways, we played it, and well, this is how well it went. Because after playing it, I went and picked up a copy. We played this 2 times back to back. I absolutely loved it. And I knew sitting there that my daughter would love this. It is very straightforward. You're moving around this grid of tiles with a little, not a beaver, what is it? It's a hedgehog, I think. You're moving around as a hedgehog and you're collecting these tiles. Some of them just give you straight up points. Some of them will give you, the point of the highest one that you collect or the point of the lowest one that you collect. There's a bumblebee that you have to pair with a honeycomb in order to score. Very, very simple. I mean, I've already explained half the game to you, but a pretty game, lots of decision making, and a little bit of some take that, some ability that you have to kind of stick your opponent at least next in line with something that they're not going to like. and also has a little bit of a push your luck element. When you pass over certain icons on the board, you can just draw some excess tokens from the bag, which makes every game very different. And I loved it. Obviously, I enjoyed it quite a bit. We've already played it twice since I came home with the family, and yeah, this is Butterfly by Rio Grande Games. So as I kept walking around the convention hall, one particular game just kept jumping off the table at me. I saw this a number of times at this small booth. I don't even know who it was. It wasn't the designer. It was some surf games or something like that. I think it was just a shop that had a booth set up, and they had Revive sitting here. This is by Aparta Games, and the theme of it is 5,000 years after basically mankind has perished from Earth, and you are the Earth, or maybe Gaia or something like that, I'm not really sure, trying to rebuild the ecosystem of Earth. This just looks amazing. It is a fairly complex game based on some quick checks I made on Board Game Geek. And like I said, every time I walked by it, I just got more and more drawn into the artwork, and the look of this thing takes up a huge amount of space. You've got this sort of engine building element that looks like you've got sort of this weird puzzle, or almost like a maze of actions that you're taking. I don't know. I looked it up. I checked out kind of a quick review. It had some really good scores. I'm interested in the complexity of this, and it was just beautiful on a table. So I picked up Revive by Aparta Games. And also, while I was at the booth picking up Revive, they had a copy of Western Legends Showdown. Now, I have just about everything for Western Legends, including the big box, which may have been a big ripoff. I did not pick up the Mountain Range upgrade, which they had for sale for $130 for a 3D printed piece of plastic, not even molded. You could see the layer lines on this thing, and I would say that it was printed at 0.2 millimeters per layer, or even worse. It was just very textured. You could see the sort of resolution of the print. It looked terrible, if I'm honest. And for 130 bucks, that was a ripoff. This, however, was 10 bucks. Now, this is a very light card game. I think it's got maybe about 30 cards in this pack, and it is very reminiscent of Air, Land, and Sea, which is a small card game where you're sort of fighting over the three theaters of a war, over air, land, and sea. In this game, you've got 3 location cards that come out. They are locations in that Western Legends sort of universe, if you will. And then you each have a hand of 9 cards. They number from 1 through 7. I think you've got 3 copies of the number 1. There may be 2 of another number, if I remember. And you're playing these cards like poker cards to these 3 locations. And then each card has its number, but then it also has a special ability that can trigger if you play it on top of a card of a lower value. And just like Air, Land, and Sea, those things could let you move cards around. They can let you move stacks of cards. They can let you swap cards. There's even the number 7 card, the highest one, which just automatically wins you that location, regardless of, as long as there is one other card there or more, you can win that location without having to, meet the requirements of that location. And those locations may require you to get, 4 cards that total up to 11, or 2 cards of each player's color. It's only a 2-player game, and I really like Air, Land, and Sea. When I saw this on the table and I kind of got an understanding of how it worked, I was really interested, and I picked it up. Again, it was only $10. Now, I've already played this a couple times, and it's not as great as I thought it was. The 3 locations never change, so even when you win one, it still just stays there, and you kind of keep fighting over it. And granted, that is kind of how Western Legends works. It just kind of feels like a missed opportunity, and I want to try out some sort of house rules on this game. Maybe one where when you win a location, a new one comes out and replaces that one. Also, the end game scoring is kind of just weird, because after you've all run out of cards, those 3 locations may still have cards at them, and basically whoever has the highest card just wins that location, and you win all the cards that are there. Whoever has the most cards at the end of the game wins. And so that end game wrap up, I don't know, it just doesn't seem interesting. It seems too powerful to the player who may have just kind of drawn more of their higher level, higher numbered cards at the end of the game. So I don't know. Neat game. I like the idea of it. I think that maybe some house rules can make it better, but this is Western Legends Showdown. So at the end of the day on Friday, the Dice Tower group gathered up its staff and just a bunch of their friends, and we had a get-together at Family Time Games on the north side of Indianapolis. Tom ordered some pizza, we had some snacks and sodas, and just sat there and played games with a handful of folks. It was a really good time, even if the pizza was Domino's. But hey, whatever. One of the games that I got to play there was the new Thunder Road Vendetta. This is from Restoration Games. This was a huge Kickstarter project that has just begun delivering to people. Maybe it's done delivering by now, I'm not sure, but I know that a lot of people have been posting pictures of their new copies of the game. This is a sort of a linear, you could call it like a 2D scrolling game where you have these cars of small, medium, and large sizes, and you're just trying to barrel down this path, sort of Mad Max style. You can shoot at other players, you can bump cars out of the way, and you're just trying to be either the last one surviving, or when the first player is completely knocked out of the game, you plop a finish line down at the end of the track, and whoever gets to the finish line first wins. That's all there is to it. I got to play this with a number of people, one of them being Mark Streed of the Dice Tower, and he was so excited to get this played again. He had played it a number of times, and a lot of us thought it was okay. The game is a big dice chucker. You're just constantly rolling a bunch of dice to see what happens. You can assign those dice to your cars to determine how far you move. There's an extra bonus die that gets rolled every round to kind of add additional movement to each car. There are additional dice that get rolled if you bump another car, and they determine which car moves and what direction it moves in, but the largest car in the stack gets to demand one reroll. You also roll for a shooting die. It's a lot of, okay, where'd this die go? Chuck that die. Okay, where'd this guy go? Okay, do you want to reroll? Okay, yeah, we roll, we chuck the die again. And it's just completely random. Sometimes you get these clusters, I shouldn't say sometimes, quite often you get these clusters of cars, and if they just start ricocheting in each other, you just have domino effect of constantly rolling these dice and constantly deciding if you're going to re-roll the dice and determining what happens. There can be these really exciting moments if a car gets pushed under a helicopter, which immediately destroys the car, even if it belongs to the owner of the helicopter, which is funny, and I think it happened once, but you could also try and set up these big exciting moments and then just nothing happens. Someone just kind of gets pushed over one lane and you go to the next player's turn. So I don't know. It was a fun game. The people that I played it with made it a lot of fun, but I'm really glad I didn't pick this up. I don't think that my gaming group would really be interested in it because it's just too random, and I don't know, unfortunately I don't have a lot of silly, sort of raucous friends that I play games with. So anyways, that was Thunder Road Vendetta. The next one we played was World Wonders, which I did mention from back on the Thursday experience. This was a game that I had picked up for someone. We played on the Dice Towers copy. This is a sort of a combination tile placement polyomino game where you have a display of pieces that are out for all players to choose from. You're trying to place out roads, you're trying to place out buildings, which I don't even know if they're really buildings. They're just these polyomino shapes, very reminiscent of some of the displays from the game of Project L, if that helps at all. And if you get the right combination of buildings or roads or the rivers that run through your maps, you can then build these wonders, these somewhat large wooden pieces. Some of them are screen printed, some of them are not. And you're just sort of placing these out on the board, and they represent additional buildings. You're doing all this, of course, for points. If you get your population high enough, you can get some extra points. The wonders are worth maybe some points themselves, maybe some additional resources, which the buildings themselves typically generate. I don't know. I didn't love it. It wasn't really very exciting. It was highly abstract, and I found out by the end of the game that the wonders really don't mean that much. You can probably win just fine without them. In fact, throughout the entire game, I only got one of these wonders placed. Every time I was working towards a wonder, someone would always snag it before I could get to it. And so I felt like I was just getting decimated. When in fact, while I did have the lowest score, I was only maybe 4 or so points behind second place, who themselves were almost 20 points behind first place, which was Jason Levine, who's kind of a gaming ninja. So yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel in that game. I do think I'll give it another try if I can get a chance. I'm really glad that I didn't buy my own copy. I was also quite disappointed by the component quality. The tiles and all that were fine, but the wonders themselves were really, really lackluster. Like I said, some of them were screen printed, some of them looked very nice, while other ones just looked like something out of a children's toy from maybe the 80s. Just very generic wooden shapes, very basic paint schemes, just not interesting looking components. Anyways, that was World Wonders by Renegade Games. After After too little sleep on Friday night, I returned to the convention hall on Saturday morning for the final full day of activities there at GenCon. And the first thing that I did was attend a scheduled demo that I had with Dead Alive Games to take a look at Lunar Rush. Now, this I actually kind of approached as a reviewer. I had sort of a reviewer block set up with them. I met with Bernie Lynn of Dead Alive Games, and he kind of gave me a rundown of the title. I remember this thing coming across Kickstarter. I don't remember why I didn't back it. I think I may have just had too many other projects going on because, as I mentioned, I love space games. This is a sort of an economy market production style game. You're moving resources from Earth up to the moon, and then you're trying to upgrade various lunar facilities that you have, trying to mine materials from the moon and bring them back down to Earth, which is kind of funny because we kind of know that there's not that much of value up there on the moon. But hey, whatever. The interesting thing of this game is that there are these three paths that you can take from either surface to the other, and it's actually based on true astrophysics. There are different ways that you can move things from the Earth to the moon using sort of different, different paths, using different gravitational forces to take either a fast trip where you can get there quickly, but you can't really carry a lot of weight, or you can take a much slower path where you can carry much heavier materials, but it takes longer to get there. And that is baked into this game with these different routes that take a different number of turns to go from one celestial body to the other, but you can carry more things the longer path that you want to take. I've read through the rulebook on this already. It looks interesting, but perhaps maybe a little lighter than I was expecting. I did end up, though, pitching in for the deluxe edition, which has some beautiful looking components and some additional cards and content, and they just kind of hooked me with this one. So I am looking forward to checking out Lunar Rush by Dead Alive Games. The next thing I did on Saturday was hit up the Cosmos booth so I could pick up a advent calendar game for my daughter and I. If you don't know these are sort of like maybe escape room style puzzles where you have 24 small puzzles you're trying to solve every day during the month of December. You have a very large box, but each door leads you to the next door as you're trying to work your way through these puzzles. My daughter loved doing the Golden Book Advent Calendar last year, and when I asked her if she wanted me to get her another, there was no pause whatsoever. Absolutely, Dad, yes, I want to do another one of those. So we picked up the Ice Cave. This was still the previous one. They did come out with a new one this year, but for some reason she wasn't interested in that one, so I picked up the Ice Cave Advent Calendar for us to play in December, and I'm already looking forward to that. After that, I linked up with a friend of mine from here in the Richmond area, Tim, and his friend Aaron. Aaron had a list of games that he wanted to check out, but it was kind of obvious that he doesn't, sort of dig himself as deep into the hobby, into the industry as I do, which was certainly fine, of course, but I had a really good time sort of escorting them from booth to booth and telling them about some of the titles that I already knew about. Maybe I already had them or had already, sat through some reviews of them. I was able to kind of help sort of give him walkthroughs or general ideas of some of the games. There were, of course, a few that he wanted to look into that I hadn't heard of myself, so I just got to hang out with them for a couple hours before lunch, and that was a lot of fun. One thing that we did was swing by the Flat River Group, which I don't know if they are a distributor, what exactly their role is in the industry. I need to look into that a little more, but there were a couple demos going of Redwood. This is from Sit Down Games. In this, you are photographers and you're trying to photograph both animals and other wildlife, plants and whatever else in various biomes, and it just looks really, really neat. It has this idea where you want to get different types of shots, different angles. You have these different movement pieces, you have these different camera lenses that you're trying to use, and it just looks fascinating. And not only did I go ahead and pick it up, but later Saturday evening I found myself in the Lucas Oil Stadium there in Indianapolis, hanging out with Chris Yee and Wendy Yee of the Dice Tower as they sat and had a lengthy conversation with Shem Phillips, designer of Garfield Games. And that was really, really neat. I'm not a huge fan of the Garfield Games lineup, but I did really appreciate that conversation. Shem is a really neat, funny guy. And then we ended up sitting and playing this. Wendy had to head off. She was getting kind of tired, but Chris Yee, Shem Phillips, Kevin McDonald, if I remember. No, Sam McDonald was his name, also of Garfield Games. And the four of us sat and played this. The game encourages teamwork at a 4-player count, so it was Shem and Chris with against Sam and I, and we got We got slaughtered in that game. Not by Shem. Shem was actually the lowest score of the foursome there, but man, Chrissy is pretty dangerous at a board game, and he carried the weight of his team into a hearty victory. The only thing I'm going to say about this game, this is a retail copy, not the deluxe edition, which I think used either plastic or wooden pieces that actually kind of slot into pegs on the board. This one just uses multi-layer cardboard to slot into these pegs, and as a result, 2 or 3 of my pieces have already ripped and are already damaged from this game. Now, I did catch word through some social media channels that they're aware of this and they're actually offering replacement pieces. I need to write off to them to get those, but just something to keep in mind if you get Redwood by Sit Down Games. So that is my Gen Con experience. I did pick up 3 other games. Actually, I should say I got 3 more games. I didn't actually purchase these. I got Rumble, Jungle, and Sleepy Cats. These are from 4 Fun Games. Roy Kennedy was given these for free when he purchased something. He didn't want them, so he gave them to me. I also picked up Photograph. This is by Matago. This was given to me as a freebie when I picked up Revive and Western Legends Showdown. So maybe I'll check those out, but I probably won't. Other than that, that was my experience at Gen Con, which, as I mentioned, was a lot of fun, but it was also quite stressful and extremely expensive. Again, a huge thank you to Katie and Greg for putting me up for the week. I would not have been able to afford this trip without that. Also, a big thanks to the Dice Tower for providing me with a 4-day pass to the show for, of course, working their booth. I gotta say, I think that Indianapolis is quite eager to rip off everyone who attends Gen Con. The prices of everything in that city were just absurd. Hotels for $300 a night for small rooms, parking rates of $35 or more a day, and everything was just unbelievably expensive. And, you got people of all walks of life. I can afford some of that, but there are a lot of folks there who I'm sure really had to go into some financial challenges just to attend that event, just to try and get their hands on some games, meet some folks, and just enjoy themselves. And so, I don't know, I felt a bit put off by the general attitude, the general cost of Indianapolis. Oh yeah, we welcome you here. Now please give us all your money. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to go back to Gen Con next year. Just not something I had an overall positive experience with. There were definitely some things that really just kind of put me out. But there was also a bunch that I didn't get to do. I didn't make it to the Hot Games room. I didn't get to, check out more games there in the library. There were other folks I didn't get to meet that I'm still hoping I can reach out to here at some point. I'm trying to work on my networking here in the hobby. Anyways, that is my 2023 Gen Con recap. Thanks for tuning in. Again, I am Jeff, and this is Tabletop Toolbox. I'll catch you later. Cheers.